Questions to the Prime Minister. Mr. David Anderson.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the whole House will wish to join me in sending our warmest wishes for Christmas to our armed forces in Afghanistan. Having just returned from there, I saw at first hand once again their incredible commitment and their dedication, and we should remember the families who will be missing them, especially at this time of year. And indeed, we should remember all our service personnel around the world. Our country owes a huge amount for the work that they do and the sacrifices that they make on our behalf. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Mr. David Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister in his wishes to our armed forces and also to all the public sector workers who will be working to take care of us over the Christmas period? Mr. Speaker, unless the mesothelioma bill is changed, 6,000 victims who were criminally and negligently exposed to asbestos at work will not receive any compensation from insurance companies. Will the Prime Minister at the 11th hour intervene to prevent this happening? And if he doesn't, would it be fair to assume he'd rather stand for insurance companies than innocent people who are exposed at work to asbestos?
I very much respect the honourable gentleman's record of campaigning on this issue, but I would say this: the mesothelioma bill is a huge step forward. Frankly, for decades there's been no provision for these people, through no fault of their own, who will die from this terrible disease. Once the scheme that we're putting in place is up and running, roughly 300 people a year will receive approximately £115,000 each. I think that is an important step forward. I'll obviously look at what he has to say, but I think we should be proud of the fact that after a long delay we are tackling this issue.
Mr. John Whittingdale.
Will my right honourable friend join me in saluting the courage of the hundreds of thousands of people who have been peacefully protesting across Ukraine for the last few weeks against the decision of their president to break off talks with Europe and move closer to Russia? Does he agree that if there is any further violence against them, then those who are responsible should be held personally accountable? And will he continue to hold out the prospect of closer links with Europe in the longer term, which is what the people of Ukraine want?
Well, first of all, I absolutely agree with my honourable friend that we should pay tribute to those in Ukraine who want to have a future linked to Europe and want the peace and the prosperity and the stability that that relationship would bring. I think we should also say, as he has said very clearly, that the world is watching what the Ukrainian authorities have done and are contemplating doing in response to these demonstrations. And I think we should stand with the people of Ukraine who want that peaceful, secure and prosperous future.
Mr. Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, I join the Prime Minister in paying tribute to all of our troops serving around the world, particularly in Afghanistan. Once again this year, they have done our country proud. They have shown the utmost courage and bravery, and all of our thoughts are with them and their families this Christmas. Mr. Speaker, today's economic figures show a welcome fall in unemployment. And for every person that gets back into work, it benefits not just them but their family as well. Does he agree with me, however, it's a major challenge for Britain that at the end of this year there are more people than ever before in today's figures working part-time because they can't get the hours they need?
Well, first of all, I think it is worth looking at these unemployment figures in some detail, because I think they do paint an encouraging picture. Unemployment is down by 99,000. The number of people claiming unemployment benefit has actually fallen by 36,000 in this month alone. There are 250,000 more people in work. Youth unemployment is down. Long-term unemployment is down. Unemployment amongst women is down. We have talked before about 1 million more people in work under this government. It's now 1.2 million more people in work. Now, there shouldn't be 1 ounce of complacency, because we've still got work to do to get our country back to work, and everyone back in work means greater stability for them, greater ability to plan for their future, greater help for their families. But the plan is working. Let's stick at it and get unemployment down even further.
Mr. Speaker, he didn't really answer the specific question I asked. It's good our economy is creating more jobs, but the problem is that too many of them are part-time or low-paid or insecure. Now today's figures show what's happening to wages. Does he agree with me it's a matter of deep concern that at the end of this year, average wages are £364 lower than they were a year ago and over £1,500 lower than they were at the general election?
Well, first of all, let me answer very directly the question about full-time and part-time employment, because actually full-time employment has grown much faster in recent months. And overall, let me tell him, since the election, 70% of the new jobs, and there have been millions of new jobs, 70% of them are full-time jobs. And that is, now, I agree, we've got more to do. We've got to do more to put in place our long-term economic plan to keep the economy growing. But I have to say to him, it's all very well standing up at the dispatch box. He said that there would be 1 million fewer jobs. That is, and we're still waiting for him to correct the record about that. Now, of course, I want to see more money in people's pockets. Now, the only way we can do that is to keep on with the economic plan, keep cutting unemployment, keep people's taxes down, cut the deficit so we keep interest rates down. That is our economic plan. What's his?
Let's talk about his predictions. Let's talk about his predictions. He said he'd balance the books in 5 years. He's failed. He said he'd secure Britain's credit rating. He's failed. And the worst prediction of all, he said he'd be good at being Prime Minister, and he's certainly failed at that. Now, and he's got no answer. And he's got no answer. And he's got no answer.
Order. Members on both sides of the House need to calm down. It will take as long as it takes, as always. It's very straightforward. Ed Miliband.
Isn't it interesting, Mr. Speaker, the thing they want to talk about least of all is the cost of living crisis facing families up and down the country. And that's because they know that families are worse off. Now, can he tell us how much higher is the average gas and electricity bill this Christmas compared to last?
Well, first of all, let us deal with the predictions. He said this.
Order. The question was asked, and the answer must be heard. The Prime Minister.
On this, they have a programme which will clearly lead to the disappearance of 1 million jobs. Now we have 1.6 million more private sector jobs, 1.2 million more people in work. It is time he apologised for his prediction of talking the economy down. He asked about the cost of living. Let us compare our records on the cost of living. They doubled council tax, we have frozen it. They put up petrol tax 12 times, we've frozen it. They put up the basic state pension by 75p, we put it up by £15. We've got a new hand gesture from the Shadow Chancellor. Yes. I would have thought after today's briefing in the papers, the hand gesture for the Shadow Chancellor should be bye-bye. You don't need it to be Christmas to know when you're sitting next to a turkey.
Mr. Speaker.
Till colleagues calm down. I don't mind how long it takes. I've got all day if necessary. Mr. Ed Miliband.
I thought just for once, Mr. Speaker, he might answer the question that he was asked. So let's give him the answer. Energy bills are £70 higher than they were a year ago. Despite all the bluster from him, that is the reality, and £300 higher than when he came to office. Let's try him on another important issue for families. The cost of childcare is crucial for parents going out to work. Can he tell us how much the cost of childcare has gone up this year?
We are providing 15 hours of childcare, of nursery education, for 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. That is something he was never able to do in government. And all of this, it is all very well making these promises. The only reason we're able to keep our promises is we took tough decisions about the economy. We took tough decisions to get the deficit down. We put difficult decisions to get our economic plan in place. And what he can't stand is the fact is, this Christmas, the economy is growing, 1.2 million more people are in work, our exports are increasing, manufacturing is up, construction is doing better, the economy is getting stronger, and Labour is getting weaker.
I tell you what, Mr. Speaker. I tell you what, that was a turkey of an answer, Mr. Speaker. Why doesn't he just for once answer the question? Childcare costs have gone up £300 in the last year, nearly 3 times the rate of inflation, and he's not doing anything about it. Now there is one group he's helped out with the cost of living this year. His Christmas card list. Can he tell us? Oh, I know he doesn't like me asking about this, Mr. Speaker. Can he tell us, for someone earning over £1 million a year, how much lower are taxes this year compared to last?
The top rate of tax under this government is higher than it ever was under his government. And the fact is, the highest 1% of earners are paying a greater percent of income tax than they did when he was sitting in the cabinet. Those are the facts. And if he wants to talk about what he's done on the cost of living, we've cut income tax for 25 million people. They voted against it. We've taken 2.4 million people out of tax. They voted against it. We froze the council tax. They voted against it. We froze fuel duty. They voted against it. The only reason we've been able to do this is we have a long-term economic plan. He ends the year with no plan, no credibility, no idea how to help our economy.
Mr. Speaker, we all know what his long-term plan is: to cut taxes for his Christmas card list and make everyone else sink or swim. That is his long-term plan. And I've got to say,
the usual low-graders can make as much noise as they like. Let me just say to them, for their own benefit, I'll say it again, some of them don't learn very quickly, however long it takes, right honourable and honourable members will be heard. It's so simple, I think it's probably now clear. Ed Miliband.
I've got to say to the Prime Minister, the more he reads out lists of statistics, the more out of touch he seems to the country. This was the year that the cost of living crisis hit families hardest. This was the year they introduced the bedroom tax while cutting taxes for millionaires. This was the year he proved beyond doubt he's the Prime Minister for the few, not the many.
He may not like the facts, but he can't hide from them. The fact is, the typical taxpayer is paying £600 less because we cut taxes. The deficit is falling, down by a third, because we took difficult decisions. Today, for the first time in our history, there are 30 million people in our country in work. Is at the end of this year, we have a recovery they can't explain, growth they said would never come, jobs they said would never happen, and meanwhile they are stuck with an economic policy that doesn't add up and a shadow chancellor they can't defend. That is why the British people will never trust Labour with the economy again.
Yeah, we'll just have to keep going a bit longer because I'm not going to have... The right honourable gentleman will be heard. Sir Malcolm Bruce.
I can give the House something to cheer about. Will the Prime Minister join with me in welcoming the fact that investment in our North Sea oil and gas industry this year will reach a record £14 billion, accounting for an unemployment rate in my constituency of just 0.7%. But is he aware that Sir Ian Wood's report that says we need collaboration between government and industry to unlock 3 to 4 billion barrels of oil worth £200 billion that will otherwise be left under the sea?
I think my honourable friend makes a very important point, which is the Wood report is an excellent report, and we're looking to put that in place because we want to maximise the returns and the employment and the investment in the North Sea. In recent months, we've seen very encouraging signs of greater investment in the North Sea, not least because of the decisions taken by the Chancellor to bring into play some of these more marginal fields. We need to keep up with that and implement the Wood report, as he says.
Mr. Gregory Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister understand, even if Dr. Richard Haas doesn't, that agreement and consensus in his talks are desirable, but will be impossible to achieve if proposals re-emerge that are viewed in the unionist community as diluting our very essence of Britishness, as Northern Ireland seeks to strengthen its position within the United Kingdom, not weaken it?
Well, what I'd say to the honourable gentleman is I think we can all agree that Richard Haas is carrying out a very important and extremely difficult task, looking into the issues of parades, of flags, and of course the past. I've met with Richard Haas. I think he's an incredibly impressive individual. We should let him do his work, and we should judge his work on the results that he produces. But I hope that everyone will try to look at this process with some give and take to try and bring the communities together.
Mr. Stuart Jackson.
Unemployment in the Peterborough constituency stands at 5.5%, the lowest since the financial crisis, and there are 1,180 fewer JSA claimants than a year ago. However, there are too many young people who are jobless and lacking work skills. So will the Prime Minister give an early Christmas present to Peterborough people by giving his personal support for our bid for a university technical college to be decided in the new year?
Well, I know that my right honourable friend, the Education Secretary, will look closely at the proposal for a university technical college. They are working well. I think it's a very good innovation in our education system. Look, the news on youth unemployment is better, 19,000 down this quarter, and the claimant count as well falling, but there's a lot more work to do. And I think we should particularly look at the work experience programmes, which seem to have one of the best records at reducing youth unemployment, and see what we can do to encourage companies and businesses to get involved in this work experience programme.
Mr. Nick Rainsford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the Archbishop of Canterbury reminding us of society's responsibility towards the support of the poor and the vulnerable, and the Archbishop of Westminster specifically criticising the inhumanity of aspects of government policy, does the Prime Minister regret, as we approach Christmas, his government's retreat from the compassionate conservatism he used to adopt?
I don't accept what the right honourable gentleman says at all. There is nothing more compassionate than getting more people into work. The best route out of poverty is work, and what we can see for the first time in our country, 30 million people in work. Now, I enjoy debating and listening carefully to our archbishops. I have to say what the Archbishop of Westminster said about immigration I don't agree with, but I think we should be frank and open about these debates and not be concerned when we do have disagreements.
Dr. Therese Coffey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and a Merry Christmas to you and your family. The people of Suffolk have enjoyed a cracker of a Christmas present with the excellent news on the A14, which will encourage greater investment in growth. In that spirit, does my right honourable friend agree with me that calls to abandon the government's long-term economic plan to borrow for the other side to plan to borrow and spend more will actually raise taxes and mortgages for hard-working people in this country?
First of all, can I congratulate my honourable friend on her ingenious way of ensuring that she's called regularly in debates and questions in this House. An example, I'm sure others will follow. And on that note, a very happy Christmas to you and your wife and children, Mr. Speaker. She has been very, very clear in her campaign against the toll on the A14, and I'm glad that we've settled that issue. But I think she's right to say that the biggest threat to our economy now would be to abandon our plan. We're getting the deficit down, we're keeping interest rates down, we're cutting people's taxes, we're seeing the country get back to work. The biggest risk is more borrowing, more spending, more taxes, all the things that got us into this mess in the first place.
Betts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the end of November, I visited Handsworth Community Sports College in my constituency. The head Anne Quayle told me of the school collecting food to help their needy families over Christmas. And indeed, they will have a food bank on the school site in the new year. What really shocked me when she told me of a young girl, aged 15, who arrived on a Monday just before my visit, not having eaten all weekend because there was no food in the house. How does the Prime Minister expect that young girl to fulfil her educational potential?
Well, we've got to do everything we can to help Britain's families, to help families into work, and that's exactly what we're doing under this government. And we also have to make sure that we protect the income levels of the poorest, and that's why, for instance, the child tax credit is up £390 under this government, protecting the money that goes to the poorest people in our country.
Mr. Ian Swales.
Mr. Speaker, experts said that Labour's energy price freeze announcement would raise prices in the short term.
Opposition, order, order, order. Opposition members shouldn't yell at the honourable gentleman. He's asking his question. Let's hear it. Mr. Swales.
Experts said that Labour's energy price freeze announcement would raise prices in the short term and protect the big six by freezing new investment. Since then, prices have gone up. National Grid say half of new investment...
I'm struggling to find anything that relates to the responsibility of the Prime Minister in the honourable gentleman's question. Therefore, we'll proceed with Mr. Gordon Marsden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Prime Minister sits down for Christmas dinner to chillax with his family and friends, will he spare a thought for my Blackpool constituents and 500,000 others whose Christmas is mired in the incompetence and random cruelty of DWP's benefit sanctions? My casework on this includes the woman denied JSA for doing voluntary work at one local branch of a national charity rather than another. Will his New Year resolution be resolving this chaos on sanctions and universal credit?
I think the best thing we can do for his constituents, and indeed everyone's constituents, is keep on with the economic plan that is generating more jobs in our country. If we look at the North West, the number of people employed is up by 37,000 since the election. Unemployment has fallen by 29,000 since the election. We need to keep on with that, while of course making sure that the benefit system works for people who need it. But he doesn't do his constituents any favours by talking down the performance of the economy.
Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister pay tribute to Norfolk's emergency services and volunteers who have done such a brilliant job in both tackling the recent coastal floods and helping repair the damage? Floods, Mr. Speaker, which were potentially worse than floods of 60 years ago that killed 300 people and destroyed 25,000 homes. Does he agree that special mention should be made of two local newspapers, the Eastern Daily Press and the Lynn News, who campaigned tirelessly, the former, which has raised over £100,000 in their appeal? Can he tell the House what can government departments do working in conjunction with Norfolk's local authorities?
Well, I think my honourable friend is absolutely right to raise this issue. I was very impressed when I went to Norfolk, went to Wells Next the Sea, to see not only the amazing contribution that the emergency services had made, but as he said, also local newspapers in highlighting this issue, in helping to prepare people for what was to come, and also the flood coordinators and the people who work voluntarily to help our communities. I was particularly impressed by what I saw in terms of what the lifeboats had done because of the enormous wave that swept through their station. But even with that, they were able to get out there and help people. As he says, because we put money into flood defences, we did protect a lot more homes than otherwise would have been affected. But the work needs to continue.
Derek Twigg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ministers have admitted to me that there are delays in completing personal independence payment claims. My constituent Cathy, who is suffering from cancer, made her claim in August. She has still not had a decision made on her claim. She also had a home appointment yesterday with an ASOS assessor. They didn't turn up. Can I ask the Prime Minister why he's allowing cancer patients to suffer because of the incompetence of his government?
I'm very happy to look at the individual case that the honourable gentleman raises. It is worth noting the fact that ATOS was working under the last government, a government in which he served, but I'm very happy to look at the individual case and see what can be done.
John Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The number of unemployed claimants in the Henley constituency has fallen to 439. That makes it the third best performing constituency in the country. Will he join with me in congratulating local businesses for the role they've played in this?
Well, Well, I'm very happy to congratulate local businesses on what they've done. The fact is, what we are seeing, and what Labour predicted would never happen, is a private sector-led recovery. For every job lost in the public sector, we've seen 3 or even 4 jobs created in the private sector, mostly by small businesses, and we need to keep up the economic environment that is helping them to take people on, to invest and to grow for the future.
McDonnell.
At the last election, many of my constituents truly believed the Prime Minister when he said no ifs, no buts, there'll be no third runway at Heathrow. They're now faced with the threat of a third runway, a fourth runway, thousands losing their homes, schools being demolished, even the threat of us having to dig up our dead from the local cemetery. Does he appreciate that many now feel that they've lost all faith in him as a man that keeps his word?
Well, I'm afraid the honourable gentleman has a very strong view about this, but I simply don't accept what he says. We said that there would not be a third runway. We have stuck with that promise. We now have a report being done by Howard Davis, which has all party support. I think it's a very good report, an interim report, and I think people should read that report before they start shouting across the House of Commons in a completely inappropriate way.
Order! I know what I'm doing. I don't need any help from backbenchers. A reference was made to treatment of constituents, not to observations made in respect of members of the House. Well, I'm very clear on that, and the procedure is extremely clear as well. Mr. Guy Opperman.
Speaker, in the North East, all 29 constituencies have seen an increase in apprenticeship starts since 2010. And I recently opened an engineering academy in Hexham. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that it is only by the provision of better skills and apprenticeships that we will improve the living standards of our young people today?
Yeah. I think my honourable friend is absolutely right, and I saw for myself on a visit to Stockton and Darlington just what a difference the extra apprenticeships and the extra funding is making. Look, we want this to be a recovery that is shared right across our country. In the North East, unemployment has fallen by 3,000 this quarter, but it is still too high. There are 28,000 more people in work than there were in the election, but we've got further to go, and we've got to stick to the economic plan that's delivering.
Mr. Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the Prime Minister concerned that in the detail of the small print of the autumn statement that by the end of this Parliament real wage levels will be 5.8% lower?
The point I'd make to the honourable gentleman is if he looks at disposable income, it is higher this year than any year it was between 1997 and 2010. And the reason for that is, in spite of slow wage growth, we have cut people's taxes. Now, you can only cut people's taxes if you take difficult decisions about the deficit, difficult decisions about spending, and we haven't had support from the party opposite for one single of those difficult decisions.
And Maine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Could the Prime Minister help getting justice for my constituents who want to know why an investigation into the meetings had by Theresa Villiers, the former Transport Secretary, have not been reported on, despite 4 months of waiting and various assurances I would have the answer?
The Honourable Lady was referring to the Right Honourable Member for Chipping Barnet.
Well, I'm aware of the Honourable Lady's letters with respect to this. She's taken up this issue, and I'm sure she'll get an answer shortly.
Mr. Stephen Pound.
Mr. Speaker, on a slightly more seasonal note, may I probe the Prime Minister on the revelation contained within the autumn statement that over this Parliament borrowing is forecast to be £198 billion more than originally planned. Will he now accept that his pledge to balance the books by 2015 has all the credibility of some proposal to build an airport on a non-existent island in the middle of a bird sanctuary in the Thames estuary?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman always brings a flavour of pantomime to our proceedings. And if he's worried about the deficit, and if he's worried about borrowing, he ought to look in front of him rather than look behind him, because we haven't had one bit of support on anything we've done to cut the deficit. And if he's worried about the deficit, why does his party propose to put it up?
Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is very good news that a record number of people are in work and that they're keeping more of their take. But there was a another milestone this week where we reached 2 million new pension savers thanks to auto-enrolment. Is that another example of how this government is taking the right long-term decisions for this country?
I think the Honourable Lady is right to raise auto-enrolment. It does mean that more people are saving for their retirement, and that means more stability, more security for them, a greater ability to plan for their future, just as the fact there are 30 million people in work, so many more in work this Christmas than last Christmas, all of those better able to plan for their future and have that basic security that people in our country rightly crave.
Speaker, now that the Prime Minister has declared mission accomplished in Afghanistan, will he guarantee that none of our brave servicemen and women who have served there will face redundancy after they come home?
I would urge the honourable gentleman to look at what I said when I actually was praising the role that our armed forces have played. They have carried out the tasks that we asked them to carry out, and they've done it with huge professionalism and skill. And as I said, they'll be able to leave that country with their heads held high, secure in the knowledge that we put in place what is necessary to stop terrorism and terrorist training camps returning to Afghanistan. Now, there are very clear rules in place about redundancy. That is, those people about to serve, serving or having returned from Afghanistan are not able to for redundancy.
Robin Walker.
Speaker, today there are more than 1,000 fewer people out of work in Worcester than when unemployment peaked under Labour. With 700 businesses in the constituency likely to benefit from the government's extension of small business rate relief, can I urge the Prime Minister to continue to do everything he can to help the high street and remove burdens on businesses creating jobs?
No, well, it is welcome news what is happening in Worcester, and of course across the country not only is unemployment down but also vacancies are up, which is good news for the future. In terms of the high street, I think we have taken some important steps forward in terms of the rate rebate of £1,000 announced in the autumn statement for businesses on the high street, and of course the £2,000 employment allowance, which means they don't have to pay their first £2,000 of national insurance contributions, and that means businesses in Worcester and elsewhere will be able to take on more people.
Luciana Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Further to the question from the Honourable Member for St Albans, that 4 months have passed since serious allegations were made that the Northern Ireland Secretary broke the ministerial code during her time as Transport Secretary. Will the Prime Minister ensure that the Cabinet Secretary responds before the House rises for Christmas recess?
I've seen a copy of the Cabinet Secretary's response, and I'm confident it will be sent in the next few days.
Mr. Philip Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Prime Minister's acceptance that something needs to be done to stop the EU migrants accessing British benefits. But would he agree with me that what he's proposing, which will probably be found illegal by the European courts, is really spitting in the wind when it comes to the problem that we face? And that the only way to actually get control of our borders back and control of our benefit system is to leave the European Union?
I don't share my honourable friend's pessimism. The steps that we're taking, including the announcement today that people coming to the UK should not be able to claim benefits within the first 3 months, we're taking these steps on the basis of legal advice and looking very carefully at what other countries in the EU do. I want to do everything possible to make sure that the right of free movement is not abused. There is a right to work in different countries of the European Union, but there shouldn't be a right to claim in different countries of the European Union. Where I would agree with him is I think we need to do more in future, and the lesson we must learn is the mistake Labour made to give unfettered access to our labour market when Poland and others joined the European Union, which led to 1.5 million people coming to our country, was a profound mistake.
Average household incomes will be substantially lower in 2015 than 2009. Is the Prime Minister concerned about this? And what has he to say to my constituents in Sunderland Central who are really struggling with the cost of living crisis caused by his government's policies?
Well, the first thing I would say to her constituents is that we are raising to £10,000 the amount that people can earn before they pay income tax. That is worth £705 to a typical taxpayer. And because of the progress we've already made, disposable income this year is higher than any year between 1997 and 2010. Now, the members opposite might not like these facts, but they are true, and it's worth remembering why we're in this situation in the first place.
He's got a very strong voice, but he shouldn't have to shout to make himself heard. The Prime Minister's answer. The Prime Minister.
The point I was making is the reason we are in this situation was laid out by the Institute of Fiscal Studies 2 weeks ago when they pointed out we'd had the biggest recession for 100 years under the last government, which cost the typical family £3,000. They should be apologising for that before moving on to the next question.
Last but not least, Mr. Rory Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Christmas in Syria will be defined by unstopping grief and horror in sub-zero temperatures. I encourage the Prime Minister to keep a relentless focus on the humanitarian relief in Syria, encourage the rest of the international community to meet the UN's demands for $4 billion of assistance and ensure that that assistance is much more imaginative and generous.
I'm very grateful on behalf of the whole House for the honourable gentleman, my honourable friend, raising this issue before Christmas, because I think that is where our thoughts should be. There is a huge humanitarian crisis affecting up to half of the Syrian population. The first thing I'd say is that Britain can be proud of the fact that at 500 million, we are the second largest bilateral donor in terms of aid going to Syria, going to neighbouring countries and helping people in those refugee camps. Now, what we should be doing is encouraging other countries to step up to the plate in the way that we have done and make sure we fulfil our moral obligations to these people who are going to suffer at Christmas time.
Order.